Optimal health for high performers. This is the Health Upgrade Podcast with Dr. Nawaz Habib.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Health Upgrade Podcast. How are you, JP?
I'm surviving.
It's been a little bit. We've not had you on recording for a few weeks, but we're back and ready to kick it up a notch. And we're excited to have a wonderful guest with us, Don Moxley, returning guest.
I'm working my way up the list. I got to get like 3 or 4 episodes in with you before I'm,
You'll be the Will Ferrell of the Health Upgrade Podcast.
There you go.
We're excited to chat with you today because really one of the things that everybody in terms of their health that is aware of HRV wants to do is to elevate their HRV. Really, this idea of boosting your HRV has become almost synonymous with longevity, with health span, with performance capabilities. And that's something that you've been really focused on in your work. If you could just give us a quick overview again of the work that you do for people that maybe didn't listen to the first episode with you. Tell us exactly what it is that you have done in your career in a nice little package, as difficult as that may be, to help people to support their HRV and improve their performance capabilities.
Well, thanks, Nawaz and JP. Thanks for the opportunity to come back on. So to give you a little bit of a background on me, I'm trained as an exercise physiologist. My early work was around sport performance, whether it be collegiate or professional. And that's been a theme throughout my career. I've always had a foot where I've worked with elite performers. And anytime that you're doing that, one of the things that I do on a regular basis is try my best to create objective signals that go with subjective signals. That so much in sport can be so subjective and so intrapersonally different. At some point in time, you've got to establish objective criteria that we can all agree that we can move forward with. So that's always been a big part of it. Listen, one of the big things in sport performance, we look at what a thing called a VO2, which in most people's mind, you put them on a treadmill, you put them on a mask, you run them till they fly off the back and you get their VO2. I've never been comfortable with that process because being a performer myself, I know mentally how hard it is for me to get ready for that test, to really go to the bone. And the idea that you're going to take people off the street and get an effective evaluation in a manner that they're going to come back to you with without torturing them, has always been a challenge. So years ago, I was working with Polar Electro, the heart rate monitor company. And we were in New York at a company meeting, and this white paper comes across my desk on using this biological feedback KPI tool to predict cardiovascular training zone. And you read this paper, and what they were talking about was HRV. They were using HRV as a predictive tool. Now, they had a process. You start by sitting, then you stand up, then you start walking, then you start jogging. You constantly add a load. And what this paper showed is that there was a point in time that as you started to rank up the workload, the HRV would drop and stabilize at a place. And that was the onset of cardiovascular fitness. I found this to be absolutely intriguing. The idea that I can optimize, because this is back in the day that we were doing 220 minus your age and putting some percentage against it. And you know what? That works for about a third of the people. There's going to be another third. This is classic statistics. It's the first standard deviation. But boy, this HRV-based assessment, all of a sudden we've got a personal day-by-day assessment of readiness. And they were calling it readiness back then. So that's where it started. I started to look at this thing and I thought, holy moly. And then Polar at the time also had a product that was called Own Recovery. So that was called Own Zone. They had a thing called Own Recovery. So I'm wearing one of their products. I'm obviously working for them. And we would spend probably 6 weeks a year out in Las Vegas for trade shows of some kind. And the Gold's Gym trade show was brutal. Okay. Because we're out there working with this group, and you're taking people out at night, and there's drinking, and there's just all the things that go with Las Vegas. And I had started monitoring my readiness using HRV, and what I saw is that I could leave my house where I trained every day and had everything good, I could leave with a morning readiness in the 60s. And this would have been an RMSSD in the 60s. A day on the road, if I flew to Chicago to work, or if I flew to Minneapolis to work and I came back, it would cut it about in half. If I went to Las Vegas for 5 days and came back, it took me 3 days just to get back to my half mark. And this was my first introduction to, this is, the environment has a much stronger impact on readiness than perhaps, the individual decisions that you make. How hard do I train that day and so forth. So that was my introduction. And then the other thing that happened that was a real breakthrough for me is once I had hardware that I could actively assess HRV with people coming into my clinic, they would come in, I would wire them up, and I would get a resting HRV prior to them doing anything in the workup. Because, listen, these people are walking through the door. Half of them I don't know from Adam. I don't know what came through. And the idea that you apply the same assessment to everyone coming through the door is frankly, I think, is laughable. So I was doing work with a lot of police and fire, and I had a police officer come in. I think it was an 8 or 9 o'clock session in the morning. Comes in. I knew this guy from back when I was in school. Wire him up, and his morning resting RMSSD was 16, 17. It was pretty low, maybe a little higher than that, but certainly low. And I looked at him. I go, "When's the last time you slept?" And he goes, "What are you talking about?" I go, "When's the last time you slept?" He says, "How do you know this?" And I go, "Just answer the question." And he said, "I just got off work. I worked midnights last night." And I'm like, "Okay, that explains a lot." And I said, "Listen, John, if you want me to do this test, I'm happy to do it. I'll do the test." I said, "But the results are not going to be valid. You're not ready for the test we're getting ready to give you." And that was a huge breakthrough for me because it was the first time that I was able to see the unseeable. It was the first time you're able to really look at this person and get a feeling that, okay, what's going on here is not typical. So it became part of my assessment from there on out. Well, then we get better wearable technology. This is back when you could only assess an HRV wearing a chest strap. And frankly, the idea that someone's going to wake up every morning and put on that wet chest strap and go through the practice of get out of bed, go to the bathroom, come back, sit down, particularly if you live in a household with a mate and a family and a dog. Okay. I rustle and the dog's at the door ready. Okay, let's go. It's one of the reasons I really like nighttime assessment because it's smooth. You get the same thing every night. So that was my introduction. That's kind of the growth I had in it is, here's this interesting data set. God, that was 30, 35 years ago that we first started to get a feeling for it. And then has it been 10 years ago that Aura released their version 1? So we started to get nighttime work back then, and then it's evolved. And we have other wearables now, whether they're wrist-based or finger-based or things like that have gotten better. But it's become clear to me that HRV is a king indicator. We talked about it, JP, you were talking about how beat up you are right now. I guarantee you, when your shoulder gets bad, your HRV drops, and the worse you feel, the more it drops. And we know right before you die, HRV goes to 0. We know you're full sympathetic at that point. And I also know that my elite performers, my Olympians, my very elite performers have the highest HRVs I've measured in anybody. They're in the RMSSDs are in, certainly above 100 milliseconds, some reaching up towards 200 milliseconds in someone that's not an AFib, which is, you got to pay attention to that. So my point is that when I work with someone, listen, here's an indicator with a 0 and a really high level. You want it moving away from 0. You want to do everything you can to move away from 0. So, and I think that's where health, wellness, longevity, these things come into play, is that it's constantly a practice of moving away from 0. You're either, what did Ray Kroc say? You're either green or you're green and growing or ripe and rotten. So I would prefer to be on the green and growing side, constantly moving away. And if you're not, you're going the other way, and don't be surprised when that happens.
So it's not going to be a surprise to any of our listeners that I'm very interested in aging and longevity.
Yeah.
And a few months ago, a group of us published a paper in Nature Aging. in which we proposed that aging, through all of its symptoms that are captured as hallmarks of aging, that all of them are really controlled with respect to the pace that they're advancing through the autonomic nervous system.
Absolutely.
And so when you think about, you were talking about the external environment and how it affects you, things like lack of sleep, toxins, et cetera. I view those as sort of the environmental and lifestyle choices that you make throughout life that have to be interpreted by your autonomic nervous system and your immune system, what I call the neuroimmune axis. And that neuroimmune axis interprets all of those things as either being a threat or not. And if it's a threat, then it will trigger what I think of as the systemic version of the cell danger response. And the cell danger response has some very, very obvious and very definable characteristics. And one of them is increase in reactive oxygen species production and sort of a loss of efficiency in your mitochondria. So what I would love to talk about is we talk a lot about HRV and inflammation, but let's also talk about HRV and your metabolism, your cellular metabolism, and maybe even a little bit about nutrient sensing. But let's focus on, what about NAD? What about electron leakage? What about things like that? How do they correlate with heart rate variability? And to what degree is heart rate variability sensitive enough to measure changes in metabolic efficiency?
JP, unfortunately, I don't know that if we have the answer to that question right now. This is a new enough indicator. This is a new enough objective measure that we're just starting to tease out what these things impact, what the impacts are. But I think we can step up a level and let's not just talk about nutrient sensing and environment, but let's also talk about central nervous system adaptation to some of these threats. Because here's what I've learned over the years. And if I have 40 wrestlers walk in at the beginning of a season, we think of all 40 of these wrestlers as being relatively homogeneous. I mean, they're similar. Now, there are huge variabilities, and this is something that just drives me crazy about performance right now, is that the idea that my 125 pounder is going to train the same way as my 285 pounder, frankly, is laughable. The idea that my guard trains like my center, the idea that my libero trains like my middle blocker in volleyball. There are huge variabilities within a relatively homogeneous population anyway. And I think there's a huge advantage right now in figuring that out, first of all. Second of all, the background that an individual walks in, and whether they're walking into Navaz's office or whether they're walking into my lab, they walk in with a personal portfolio that is incredibly dynamic. So let me build this out just a little bit. So by 2018, we started our program in 2015 with the wrestling team at Ohio State, working with one athlete. And we got a pretty good story with it that this is how I got introduced to IHMC, is I got to go down and present my program down there. And so we had the next year, one of my teammates and another HRV enthusiast, Dr. Rauf Garbo, came through and gave me a first beat system. And so all of a sudden, I'm doing fairly long-term studies on individual wrestlers. I'm getting 48, 72-hour studies, 2 or 3 nights of sleep, and we're getting the daytime workload in on them too, which gave us a little bit more information. And this is where we started to see the range. My Olympic gold medalist was 152 milliseconds on average at night. And then everybody else, then we created a range over the time that I started to figure out that if I sent a wrestler to nationals with RMSSD of less than 70 milliseconds, they didn't make All-American. If I could send 75 or above, they made All-American. So we figured this out by 2016, 2017, and we began investing in recovery because this was an objective variable that we could plan on, we could see it move, and there was data. Now, the last year, I sent 10 guys to nationals. The whole starting lineup went to nationals, first time in school history. 8 All-Americans, most in school history. The 2 that did not make All-American had the lowest HRVs on the team. They were less than 70 milliseconds. And you know what? I worked with those guys hard, but I could not budge that number with them. Now, when I go back and look at them, I can tell you both of those athletes, there was some I think there's evidence of trauma, whether it's lifestyle, whether it's home living, there's evidence of trauma. And then, so after I left Ohio State and went to work in the cannabis space down in Florida, I came across a couple really interesting papers looking at, this was the first time that we saw someone define the runner's high as something other than dopamine. Okay. And they said, oh, there's this other molecule out there, the endocannabinoid, anandamide, that looks like it's the trigger for the runner's high. So we now have a molecule identified that's creating this subjective response listen, we figured out anandamide when we started studying cannabinoids, and this is where it came. So we saw that. And prior to going down there, I was getting some people reaching out to me because, listen, our HRV program got pretty good. We were getting some really interesting data on some really interesting kids. And I had some pro guys reach out to me and say, hey, what do you know about cannabis and HRV? And I'm like, I don't know anything about cannabis and HRV. I said, my guys are NCAA athletes. It's against the rules. But I started to do a little research and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. Then I had the opportunity to step into the industry and really learn about the range of molecules that come from this plant and their impact on the central nervous system. So this is a long trek around a circle. JP, I'm going to come back to. I think that any time that you have a molecule, a ligand, a particular element that's lacking, the body is going to stimulate you to go find it. I've thought about, so hunger is your body saying you need nutrients. Thirst is your body saying you need hydration. It's an indicator, okay? So what is anxiety? It's not too much energy being burned. We want to say, oh, these kids are anxious because they got too much sugar. No, it's a lack of anandamide. It's a lack of the essential ligand that causes a relative peace, that they call it the Zen molecule for a while. Now, so to come back and answer your question, I think that if you do have a lack of, say, NADH in your electron transport system, there's going to be a signal that stimulates you to go find that molecule. Okay, I think this is a natural evolutionary response that we have lost touch with, and because I don't believe we choose our environment. Our environment is imposed on us most of the time. We've chosen. All three of us are sitting here in chairs while we're recording. That's why it makes it nice. It keeps the cameras and so forth, but a chair is not a health-giving device. We'd be much better off up moving around doing things. Our bodies evolved for that. And it's the movement that has been removed from our environment because of industrialization and all the things. Listen, we live in temperature-controlled environments. JP, you're down in South Florida right now. I'm sure the air conditioner's on. I'm in central Ohio. We're kind of moderate today. We were showing our temperatures before the show. I'm in a 65 degrees. So we neither have air conditioning or heat on. And Navaz is up in Toronto, and I'm sure the furnace is going up there. So we have three people in three completely different environments that have been stabilized or normalized, which is going to have three different effects on us, which this is the variation that comes into this. Well, I think this is one of the challenges, JP, is that as a practitioner, I need to figure out what is the package that's walking into me and what is the individual response. Because the other thing that we've learned about HRV is the response is incredibly individual. This idea that I'm going to look at someone else's HRV and compare it to mine is a huge mistake. It is a dramatic mistake. So one of the other papers that I came across back then, JP, was on fear conditioning in mice and dogs. And this study was looking at the role of the amygdala in fear conditioning. And what they saw was a natural drop of anandamide in the amygdala, and it's persistent. It does not come back. And I saw this and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. And I go back to the Vietnam War in my childhood and the fact that a lot of those guys came back from Vietnam everyone said, oh, they're addicted to marijuana. Well, no, we took humans and fear conditioned the daylights out of them. We dropped them into, one of the worst environments in the world. And when we come back, we expect them to be normal. We've been doing this for millennia. Governments have been doing this to our citizens. And I always relate this, that if you're born in a rattlesnake pit, the only way you get out of there is being hypervigilant. Otherwise, you don't get out. And even if I take you out of the rattlesnake pit and I put you in a house full of bunny rabbits, you're still hypervigilant. It doesn't come back. Well, this is replacing the ligand that's being driven by the anxiety. So whether it's NADH and we replace it with NAD or NMN or NR, or I think when we start talking about reactive oxygen species, we really drop down to that level, and then we have stress that comes from that at the same point. But to really close the circle on this is that I see HRV as that king element, that king indicator. If it's low, you got to start thinking about, am I not moving enough? Do I not have the right nutrients? Am I not getting enough sleep? That's the analysis that goes into that when you get the poor reading. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I want to dig just a little bit deeper and say, okay, when you get somebody who comes in fresh off the street and you get a measurement of a low HRV on that person, the things that are probably going through your mind are, first off, is this person in any kind of physical shape? That's probably one of the first things. Second might be, when did they get any sleep last night?
Right.
Another might be, did they have some trauma in their background that is really affecting them emotionally and
that's a hard one. Boy, that's a hard
one to get to. Absolutely. But in terms of coming up with a plan for how we're going to increase the HRV, inevitably, that's going to include better diet, better sleep, and exercise. I mean, it's not rocket science, but those three things, it can be if you dig into it, which is what we're trying to do here. The thing that I'm driving at with this is, are there things that we can take as supplements that we know affect different systems in our bodies? For example, we talk a lot about vagus nerve stimulation and the effect it has on NF-kappa B and the whole inflammasome and the inflammatory cytokine expression, et cetera. We know that vagus nerve stimulation increases HRV. And we know that. Those tests have been done.
Data is very clear.
What about something like intermittent fasting, which we know is going to alter the AMP kinase and mTOR expression and signaling in a direction that one would think would be anti-inflammatory and would also support higher HRV? What about something like a supplement like urolithin A? Urolithin A, it's going to help promote biogenesis, mitochondrial biogenesis. It's going to supposedly increase your VO2 max. Is that something is there any data that says, hey, it also kicks up your HRV? Do we have anything like that? What about NM and NR? We were just talking about.
I don't think there's any doubt. I have in my podcast and in the stuff that I write, I talk about what I call rocks in the jar. I go back to Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and the whole. And in whether it's in the sport or the biohacking community, people tend to get caught up on some of these tangents and, should I be doing this and should I be doing that? And the biohacking environment's an interesting environment. I have described it as people who want the benefits of exercise but don't want to exercise. Because listen, the data is incredibly clear. If you're not moving, you're aging. Aging negatively. I don't have a great term. I've got to figure out what the term is there. But you're declining if you're not moving enough.
You're accelerating this pace of aging.
Yes. Our mutual friend Ken Ford talks about that. He doesn't like the term anti-aging because aging's good. It means you're breathing. If you're not aging, it's bad. It means you stopped breathing. So I want to be careful with that. So whether I'm optimizing or declining or things like that. So my rocks in the jar on this are movement is clearly number one. If you're not moving, you hack movement with exercise. You hack, do the Amish need to exercise? Probably not.
They're getting their steps in.
I'll tell you what, we were living last summer up in northern Indiana in the middle of this Amish community. I'm out riding my bike one day and my fitness is kind of low from where I'm, just our lifestyle. An Amish guy with work boots on a recumbent rode around me like I was standing still. And I thought, okay, you got to get your fat ass in shape. So that was an indicator to me, okay? That was a social indicator. But movement's critical, and you hack it, and there's great techniques for doing it. There's lots of ways to do it, and that's why you work with a pro. Number 2, nutrient-dense food. If you're not eating nutrient-dense food, you're not getting the micronutrients. And I tend to believe, for 5 of the last 8 years, I've been working for a company called Longevity Labs. And the product that we were selling is called Spermidine Life. Spermidine's a molecule of polyamine that is critical in the methylation process of autophagy genes. Now, we're starting to go down, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but going back to your intermittent fasting, I don't know what your HRV does when you fast. Right now, my HRV drops when I fast. And to me, that's the body saying, hey, you need to get some food. You obviously don't have the same food you've been having. I'm going to stimulate you to go get food. Listen, we also get ketones. We also get, ketone signaling on that, which is the same thing. I mean, when you're starving and you're making ketones, you get really sharp. That's the evolutionary response to, okay, go kill something. Let's go kill something and eat it. So that's my second rock, nutrient-dense food. My third rock is sleep. And you don't hack sleep, you hack the sleep environment. You hack the sleep process, and you hack the circadian alignment process. That's important. I think that's sleep/circadian alignment.
You can hack the internal environment too.
To a degree. But, I can go climb in my sauna and get benefit and get exercise-like benefit from that. That is a benefit without exercising. It's difficult to get sleep-like benefits without sleeping.
Correct.
It's just really hard to do. I can get nutrient-dense food benefit by supplementing nutrients.
But what you can do with sleep is you can enhance the efficacy of the
Absolutely.
two primary
You can
things.
hack the environment. Yep.
Well, no. I mean, the two things that sleep have to do internally in your brain. One is it has to clear out the neurotoxic waste that's come from the metabolic activity during the day. Which is glymphatic clearance. You have to make glymphatic clearance as efficient as possible. And there are things that you can do to make that happen. The second thing you need to do is you need to consolidate memories. That usually happens in the latter cycles of sleep. You need to be able to, get those bursts of activity that go from your hippocampus up into your neocortex. You gotta basically transfer those memories. Those two things have to happen. But there are things that we do in our lives, not just externally with blue lights and staying up late and binge watching the next, Netflix show, that disrupt that sleep cycle internally. Things about, you're talking about food that you're eating. We all know if you take caffeine, that's going to disrupt your sleep. Drugs that do it, including alcohol. But you can also do things, like taking a little melatonin. That can help. There are things.
If melatonin is lacking, because this is the thing, I think we've got to be really careful here, because I personally, and we'll talk about this as we go. Melatonin is never my first recommendation if someone's struggling with sleep. My first recommendation if someone's struggling with sleep is magnesium. That's usually my first. Now, if it's deep and struggling, I usually try to get this person to work with someone who's a sleep specialist. And I try not to go too deep in it. And the same thing, if someone's struggling with energy, if someone complains they don't have energy, the first thing I go to is NAD. And I go to NMN. I don't go NAD. I go NMN and NR. I go with the precursors.
Or tryptophan. Just give them tryptophan.
Yeah, I don't.
Tryptophan is the precursor for the de novo synthesis pathway.
Exactly. So I'll usually make that referral in that situation. If someone's struggling with HRV, we were talking about before the podcast started, I think of HRV at an animal level, at an individual level, as a 4-leaf clover. And when someone comes to me and we talk about it, so the first thing that's going through my mind when I'm working with someone, what is their background? What is the trauma portfolio that they bring? And everybody brings one. This is not debatable. The data is very clear on this. Everybody brings their own portfolio.
Everybody's got some crap.
Everybody's got some. And you know what? That crap, it can make you stronger. It can make you more persistent. It can help you develop grit. I tell the story. One of the reasons we wrestled, we wrestled in high school. That was our sport. And one of the reasons we lived in a house that in the wintertime, the water froze. We lived in the middle of the strip mines down in southeast Ohio. And for anywhere from a month to 2 months a year, the water frozen. And if I didn't wrestle, I didn't get a hot shower that day. Wrestling was my guarantee of a hot shower that day. If we had phys ed to school or something like that, but we just didn't, we didn't have hot water flowing through the pipes in our house. That was trauma. When you look at it, that was traumatic, but it was a traumatic experience that you develop grit. We tell the story. It's legendary in our family. We had our house was on the hill, and then a barn was down across the road, and then below that was a creek. And that was our main source of water for a lot of times. Well, to get water from the creek to the house, it happened in 5-gallon buckets. And there's 3 boys, and we would usually carry 2 5-gallon buckets in each hand. And we had a choice. We could either walk the long way around the barn, or we could go up this really steep hill that cut the distance by a third. But it was a sprint up this 45-degree incline. And at the top, you had to heave these buckets over the guardrail or they spilled. I think there's a reason we were pretty good wrestlers is because just living every day included, stuff like carrying water to the house and showering, and doing these things. You develop grit. You develop the understanding that and so there's a benefit. So the question, does the trauma create a problem or does it create strength? And there are some, and there's some traumas no human should have to deal with. And I don't want to minimize that at all, but you have to understand it. And as a practitioner, you need to recognize it. Listen,
there's hormetic stresses, and then there are damaging stresses. And what you're talking about there is that what you did was hormetic. What you're talking about that nobody should go through are the damaging ones.
Well, let me put it on here's the other side of the continuum. I wrestled at Ohio State during the tenure of a team doctor that was raping athletes. Now, did I have the same experience as some of my teammates did? No, I clearly did not. But that's stuff that people shouldn't have to deal with.
Yeah, of course.
And it creates trauma, and that's deep trauma. And unwinding this is a big deal. So you have your trauma portfolio. That's one leaf of the 4-leaf clover. So the question, the other 3 leaves are how do we recover this? How do we get it back? I think there are psychological tools, meditation, visualization, tools like that. These are all tools that absolutely apply to success. These are tools I learned back in the early 1980s that contributed to success for me, helped me manage anxiety back then, but that I still practice today. Now we have other things that attach to them that make them more effective, like heart math and things like that. The ability to gamify the process and guide it, that's really good. I think there are chemical ligands. At the end of the day, a ligand is a molecule that lands on a receptor. In any system, you have a ligand, a receptor, and you have enzymes. You have enzymes that turn the ligand off and turn the ligand on. So there are ligands. We know now that there are CB1 and CB2 receptors, okay? And we know the CB2 receptors are very impactful on inflammation. We know that CB1 receptors are very impactful on this recognition of threat. When we start looking at the role of anandamide in the amygdala, the recognition of threat, someone who's traumatized and they look on the ground and see a snake, it's always, first of all, we always have negative reactions to snake, but someone who has the ability to kick in that prefrontal cortex and say, oh, that's a gardener snake, or that's a black snake, that's not a rattlesnake. But someone who's been traumatized, they always see a rattlesnake. And rightly so. That's what trauma does, and that's how they protect themselves. And then the third leaf is mechanical tools. Massage is a wonderful mechanical tool to help modify HRV and the body's response. We can use, your transcarotid vagal nerve electrostimulation. There's lots of tools, mechanical tools, but that's the thing you have to keep in play, that number is what results from those 4 elements: traumatic portfolio, what you're doing psychologically, what you're doing from a chemical standpoint, a ligand standpoint, and what you're doing from a mechanical standpoint. Those numbers are going to emerge.
The movement
from that.
piece for me is really sticking out because we've over time become so much more dormant in our day-to-day lives. We've become so much more stationary. And because of the use of now technology in virtually every single job that is out there, except for obviously like the trades, for example, we tend not to move nearly as much as we used to. And I think that piece is so important as a foundational thing for people to note, because movement builds cardiovascular capacity, it builds muscular capacity. As the muscles get better, they regulate blood sugar more effectively, which lowers so many things. They build out, they support myokines. Myokines are released through the bloodstream, which is going to help promote BDNF production, which is where the brain support comes from. We build stronger synapses. What's happened for a lot of people is we've become disconnected body from mind. And we tend to think that we can think our way out of every issue internally. But really, the issues need to be moved through. We need to move through those issues. Building the capacity to think through things more effectively actually comes from building the muscle first, building that capacity first. And I think that is foundational to all of this, right? We can't just go and throw a vagus nerve stimulator on and expect that our HRV is going to elevate. It's a great adjunct tool in a situation where there are therapeutic necessities involved. But without adding in the movement, without focusing on the sleep, without focusing on the nutritional specifics that are required, on getting rid of the processed crap, the high sugar, all that stuff, and focusing on whole foods, clean, minimally processed, etc.
Just recently lived food.
Recently lived. I love that.
Yeah.
And at least at some point lived.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so those are my 4 rocks: movement, nutrient-dense food, sleep, and light. Nutritive light. Get nutritive light in, toxic light out. Those are my 4 rocks. I'm considering adding a 5th rock, and the 5th rock that I'm considering adding is community. Up until now, I have viewed community as the byproduct of having, and the jar is important too. The jar is purpose. You've got to wake up in the morning and you've got to have something. The environment is pushing back on you negatively hard. You've got to recognize that. And if you just let the environment push back, the end of your life is not going to be pleasant. It's not going to be what you've dreamed of. So first, ideating what you want, I call it the third. You spend the first third of your life learning, the second third earning and service to others, and your third is your third. My daughter moved out. We have 1 child. My daughter moved out 4 years ago. My wife and I started our third. I expect to work my entire life. I see too many people that retire and die. And I don't know about you guys. I feel like I learned as much in the last year as I had the lifetime before that. And I expect to learn as much in the next year as I have up until this point. It's accelerating so fast that I don't want to stop. But in this third environment, if you're not pushing back against the environment will crush you. And you're going to spend the last decade of your life visiting hospitals, visiting doctors' offices. You're going to spend the last year of your life with a bunch of tubes stuck in you and an inability to get out of your house. I still want to be able to fight my way out of a bar if I can. I'm still enough of a jerk that I want to run my mouth every once in a while, and I want to be able to do that and stay relatively safe.
You're as good once as you ever were, right?
Yeah, good once as I ever was. That's exactly it. Yeah, so I want to keep that in place. You know what? I think I talked about this on your podcast last. When I think of a do you remember the movie Legends of the Fall with Brad Pitt and that character, and the Native American narrator talked about when he died. He said, and he was killed by a bear, and the Native American said, and the narrator said, and he died a good death. I love this idea of a good death. Whether I'm out running along the Grand Canyon and I slip and I get to enjoy the ride down, or however it happens, it's the opposite of hospitals and tubes. It is the exact opposite, because none of us gets out of biology. Always wins. We have to know that. And as much as tech entrepreneurs and biohackers want to extend lifespan, you know what? We're not going to see $1.50 anytime soon. I don't see any technology
I'm going to push back on that one.
Okay.
I actually think that we are. In fact, I think there is some truth, maybe not entirely, but I think that there's truth to the statement that the first person to make it to 1,000 is alive today. And
they're not going to do it sitting in chairs.
You're not, of course. Yeah. But I think that the if you take, and I'm in the process of doing this, so it's a little bit of a foreshadowing of something to come. But if you take all of the aging diseases
mm-hmm.
and you really analyze what causes them, get down to the tissue level, then get down to the cellular level, then get down to the molecular level, what you find is that all of them are driven by the same core 7 or 8 different things.
I agree.
And those 7 or 8 different things, 6 to 7, if we say it's 7, then 6 of them are reversible.
Sure.
Absolutely reversible. If you say it's 7, then it's 6. If you say it's 8, then it's 7. There's one that isn't. But that one, it may actually be something that we can reset. And that's what partial reprogramming,
like a Yakima, the work that
David Sinclair's
working.
He's not the only one.
Right.
He's the one who's got a lot of hype around him.
Listen,
but there's
good on you. I far be it from me to piss on your campfire because to try it not shine as much.
They're doing it in animals. They're
I
doing
love
it already.
Good job. I am right now. I want to be a 70 or 80-year-old that can still teach wrestling. I want to be an 80 or 90-year-old that's still vigorous. I want people to point and say, who is that guy? Listen, if you cross that threshold and we go through this singularity, good on you. Okay. But biology always wins, always. And I want to make sure that if I get through the 100-year-old threshold, moving towards 200, I want to make sure that last 100 years is as good as my last 10, is as good as the 10 I would have normally. So perspective is critical on that.
I want us to get to the point where I can take a 65-year-old and move him back to being 35. And then, yes, that person who's 35 is going to continue to age. We have to do it again. But during that time, I'm fairly confident that the technology is going to advance. The knowledge is going to advance further. We're going to get better at this to the point where the cycle doesn't have to be from 65 down to 35, back to 65, back down to 35. It's going to be, no. You're just going to be 35, which is going to be interesting because you're right. The biology is ultimately going to be what does get you, but it's probably going to be a lot more trauma. And it's going to be, so when you said slip off the edge of Grand Canyon and enjoy the ride down, hope you don't twist your ankle and you're just grabbing your ankle the whole way.
Yeah, there you go.
But that's the type of thing that is probably going to get most people at some point, because when we strip away age-related degeneration and we strip away all of the other age-related problems, you're going to be left with disease, which we probably are going to be able to conquer, infections and things like that. And you're going to be left with trauma. Trauma is going to be the way most people go.
Trauma, yeah. There's
which is very acute.
I have a talk. It's up on my YouTube channel. It's called Biomarkers, Biotech, and Bio something else. I forget the name of it. And I talk about what's called the Frogger lifestyle. So many of us live, and if you remember the video game Frogger, you had to have the little frog jump across the traffic, and he always got hit. So many of us live a Frogger lifestyle. And we just don't know where the cars are coming from and what's going to take us out. Our challenge is to get out of the video game. Challenge is to get to that point. So listen, I love it. I respect it. What I do know is we can't get there without movement, without nutrient-dense food, without quality sleep, without nutritive light. I know we can't get there. And I know we have to have a purpose. We have to have something to wake up for every day. Out of that, we will build community. Community is a clear biomarker. It's a clear indicator that we will build that. And you know what? Just the three of us, think about the community that we've built. I see Navaz presenting at a conference out in Las Vegas a couple years ago. We get connected. All of a sudden, JP, you and I are connected through Navaz. But then we find out we have this common community back through IHMC. That's the cool thing about the world right now, and the ability to be able to take full advantage of that.
Had this saying, he said, it's not a small world, because we always say, oh, this person, that person, it's a small world. That's not what it is. It's a very connected world. But you have to allow for the connections to be built and be in this communal space, because what's the law of, we all know somebody within 6 degrees of separation.
6 degrees of separation.
We all know somebody within 6 degrees. And that just shows how close we truly are knit. I want to step back into the biochemical a little bit, because for those people who are looking to slow that decline in aging, and JP, you said it earlier, the article is brilliant, by the way, autonomic deregulation theory of aging, or this idea of how do we slow the aging process or not allow it to be accelerated, essentially, is really the key. And so autonomic regulation is top of this key, right? Making sure that the stressors don't outweigh the recoveries, that the recovery capability is as high as possible.
What
Exactly.
even is a stress? We actually, we're not changing the world, but we need to recognize that things aren't stresses and not interpret them as stresses, because when you interpret those things as stresses, and I don't just mean cognitively, when your body interprets something as a stress, then it triggers the cell danger response. And the cell danger response then.
But having the acute scenario is good, right? We need to have it in acute scenarios, but we need to be able to bounce back. We need to be able to recover and enter the parasympathetics quickly. What we're looking for ultimately is adaptive capacity, it's resilience. So when it comes to that response, when people are stuck in a situation where inflammation levels are high because they're in this chronic sympathetic state, they've been in this fight or flight mode for such a long time, and they're seeing on their wearable devices HRVs of 15, 18, low levels, right? They're not sitting where they want to be, and they see their friends. And yes, I completely agree with you. We should not be comparing between people, between devices. We have too many of our own things. But ultimately, if the goal is to raise our HRV, if our goal is to increase that number as the proxy that we're using to determine how adaptive our autonomic nervous system is, you found a blend that works quite well in helping to elevate that HRV number. I would love to dig into this blend that you've created with Mode and Method and this product HRV Plus, because this is really, really interesting to me.
Yeah, this, Navaz, it goes back to when I was in Florida. I have this indication that, okay, there looks like there's something here, and I tend to go down those rabbit holes pretty quickly. And when I lived down in North Palm Beach, I lived in this little 1-bedroom flat apartment, and my kitchen looked like Breaking Bad. I had beakers and scales and everything all over because I wanted to understand cannabinoids. The challenge with the cannabis market is that we legalize this product on the backs of epileptics and cancer patients, where there's good clinical data showing there's benefit. The problem becomes it becomes an adult use market right off the bat. Now, listen, I just got done talking a little bit about Vietnam vets. And when we say adult use, what is that adult using it to resolve? Again, and when we start to look at trauma and all these things, you have to, being judgmental on this is not a good first step, okay? Trying to understand the person, having compassion and empathy is a great first step. Kind of, you can go through life that way. But I started to look at, okay, there are other molecules that affect you differently than what THCA and THC does. CBDA is an excellent molecule that mimics anandamide, the molecule that your body produces when you exercise. Not only does CBDA mimic it, it lands on the same receptors. So this is a plant-human parallel that's developed over time. Remember, until 1948, cannabis was part of the United States Department Pharmacopoeia. You can talk about the politics that moved it off. I mean, I don't want to go down that road, but it was part. It's been used as medicine for thousands of years. We have some challenges right now in the available products, but so I started looking at this. I said, okay, so if CBD, and we know that there's this thing called CBD, cannabidiol, which initially became a byproduct of cannabis production. It was a throwaway. Well, early on, they started to see, and this goes back to the early Sanjay Gupta work that he did on CNN, that, wow, this works with epileptics. And, well, not only does CBD work with epileptics, but CBDA is even better. So it's even better. And I think of vagal nerve stimulation, transcarotid vagal nerve stimulation, as working with epileptics. And I see this and ketone esters, also a very positive tool that came from the exploring treatments for epilepsy into human performance. So all three of those are big in my boat. But I started looking at this and, okay, how can we get this in? Well, the second part of that is not only do you get cannabinoids from this plant, but you get a thing called terpenoids. These are plant molecules and the challenge, listen, one of the classic arguments about this is that right now you can't patent a terpene, or you can't patent a plant product, so research doesn't go into it, and big pharma doesn't get into it, so it gets pushed aside or it gets quashed. You can take the conspiracy theory of your choice there, But what I do know is that there is another terpene called beta-caryophyllene. It's called a dietary cannabinoid. It comes in black pepper and mangoes and some other plants. So it's not a cannabinoid, it's a dietary terpene, dietary cannabinoid terpene, which is also a tremendous anti-inflammatory tool. So I started playing with this. I started to play with tinctures and to get these products. These are throwaway products in most of the processes, so they're relatively inexpensive. And I started playing with this, and I'm like, oh wow, we're starting to see a change here. We're seeing a difference. And where the product came from actually is that I'm in Florida working in the cannabis industry. I had a brother that was struggling with an autoimmune response. And I said, Chuck, I said, everything that I see about autoimmunity has to do with inflammatory response. If it has to do with inflammatory response, if I were you, I would get cannabinoids and terpenes in your system. So I started making him, he said, well, I made him a tincture. He started using it and he was declining. They wouldn't classify him. It was something between MS and Lou Gehrig's, it was, in that range. And he was declining. He came to me one day and he says, listen, he says, your tincture does more for me than anything else I'm doing. And we lost my brother 5 years ago now. So they've got his immune system suppressed. He got COVID and it took him out. But that was always rolling with me. I always had that I was doing. So when I was working for Longevity Labs, what we saw, there's a online influencer by the name of Dave Asprey. And we were on Dave Asprey's podcast. We paid to be on it, and it blew our sales up. It was amazing. His people loved our product. And I said to our management team, I said, listen, I'm really glad we're selling lots of products. I'm really glad this is going good, but we need to understand why people are buying this. So about 3 weeks after you bought our products, about 3 weeks into it, you got an email to have a phone call with me because I wanted to know why people were buying this product. What were they seeing? Well, Dave at the time was also an advisor to Aura, and he had said, buy an Aura ring. So his people all went out and bought Aura rings. So 80% of the people I talk to on this podcast have an Aura ring. 80% of them don't know what to do with it. And so Daniel Dietz, our CEO, comes to me and says, can we make a supplement? I said, I've already done it. I said, I did it in Florida. I've already worked it up. The only change that we made was based on some work that I did down at IHMC, JP, was I learned about SPMs. And I said, this is instead of putting this product in a coconut oil like you get with most tinctures and most cannabis supplements, our supplier went to Portugal. We found the source of the high quality SPM oil, and we combined the cannabis extracts with the SPM. We also put a little magnesium in it. We put a little curcumin in it. Again, just little bumps. And lo and behold, people are talking about, man, this is really moving my HRV. We did a little study with this with Heads Up Health. Okay, we saw a pretty good range. We saw a lot of reaction to it. So it wound up being a nice little product that we developed. And so I've now come back. I left that company. That product got sold off. I've now joined the ownership group of Mode and Method now. So I've kind of got my daughter's the most important thing I've done. This may be the second most important. This is the thing I created that makes a difference. And we're starting to put together a company, Navaz, that looks at these unique long tail kind of molecules. What's out there that that's not readily available? Or what listen, I think we need to put creatine on my suggestion right now is I want to combine creatine with NMN and with some other bioflavonoids to make a more complete supplement. Because I know when I go to bed every night, I make my drink, I put creatine in, I put NMN in, I do my other things. Well, if I can get this in one can and put 1 scoop or 2 scoops in, I want to be able to do that just to lower the hassle factor. So that's what Mode and Method is. And we've created this product called HRV Plus. If you go to modemethod.com, you'll see a lot there. But, it's that second step in Rocks in the Jar, nutrient-dense food. If you're not getting the level of omega-3s in your diet, you're going to have a deficiency. So you supplement those with DHA, EPA, omega-3s. Well, you know what? If you enzymatically spin that omega-3 up into SPMs, they're more readily available. The effect is going to come faster. It's going to probably be a greater effect. I still supplement omega-3s. My friend Dr. Tommy Wood just wrote a book. JP, I'm sure you know Tommy, The Stimulated Mind.
Guy.
Yeah, what a great guy. And it was refreshing to learn from Tommy is that there may be mercury in tuna, but the benefit of the omega-3s is greater than the risk of the mercury. And I love that kind of concept. So I've started eating more sushi again, because I'd kind of backed off worrying about it. And Navaz, I don't know what your thought is here, but just because you can measure mercury in your blood doesn't mean it's.
I think if you have adaptive capacity,
again, I'm now fully out of my domain.
Capacity, if you have the biochemical capability to detoxify or eliminate it effectively, meaning your gut is working well, your liver is working well, your kidney is working well, then you should be okay to handle it. And that's why, we can see pretty clearly, fish-heavy diets are pretty healthy overall. Like a Mediterranean pescatarian diet has been shown to have a phenomenal result on HRV. So, that's a great place for people to start. And I don't think fish itself is the problem. It's what we're doing to the environment that the fish are living in that's creating a bigger problem. So if you can choose the best sources of fish, if you can choose sources that are lower in mercury or not the bottom feeding fish as often, and you're getting fish that are wild caught, able to, be in an environment that's relatively clean, then we're probably in a safer place. But I don't think we can vilify fish for its mercury content as being the source of so many biochemical breakdowns.
We were talking about environmental trauma, environmental stress. I have distinct memories as a child on the farm, in the garage. We broke a thermometer open. We had mercury. We played with it in our hands. I'm not sure if that's where my Spider-Man capabilities come from, but I've got a feeling I had more trauma and more mercury poisoning from that than I do from, chicken of the sea. But that's just a guess on my part.
This blend is so unique. I think nobody's put this together yet. And I think that you've done such a good job putting together the EPA, DHA, SPM combo, number one, as kind of the base, adding in the CBD, CBDA, the terpenes through the plant cannabinoids to help with the anti-inflammatory response. We know omega-3s are going to have this anti-inflammatory response. SPMs are an accelerated version of that. We know that the CBD, CBDA in particular is going to bind to the anandamide receptors and reduce inflammation at the cellular level. We can, without a doubt, state curcumin is one of the most anti-inflammatory compounds on the face of the planet, and it's been used for thousands of years to help reduce inflammation. And magnesium, one of the most deficient nutrients that's present on the planet, that's what you've stuck together in this wonderful combination. I think that is what's so unique about this particular product, is it's so focused on building that adaptive capability. It's built on reducing the effects of inflammation, giving the autonomic nervous system a chance to resolve more effectively through these biochemical sources of anti-inflammatory capability or function. So this is really why I wanted to have you on today to talk about, yes, we absolutely need to move better. We need to sleep better. We need to improve these things. But for a lot of people, the stress is a lot for them to take. It pushes them into a sympathetic state more readily. It knocks them into a hyperinflammatory state. And that's a chronic response. And that's breaking down mitochondrial function. It's breaking down energy capabilities. And the effects are clearly visible in the vast majority of the population that are not doing super well in terms of their health. So how do we, on an individual level, take that responsibility to rebuild our adaptive capacity, to build resilience such that we don't allow the aging scale to be accelerated and drop as quickly as it is and have us sitting on tubes for the last 10 years of our lives, because none of us want that. So this is really powerful. It's really exciting that you've put this together and you've got this out to the world. And I'm excited to see what kind of comes next from you, because the way your mind works, the way you're putting these pieces together and the curiosity that you're utilizing and then plugging together to support the world, I'm so excited to kind of see how it goes.
Oh, that's really nice. I appreciate that. Navaz, we all wake up, in sport. This is where I go to, is that, back when I was an athlete, you could get better by working harder. That was a legitimate pathway to success. You know what? These days, there's a lot of kids that are working really freaking hard, okay? And your ability to move ahead with that as your sole strategy, I'm not sure is realistic. You have to have hard work. I'm not minimizing that at all, but it is not a differentiating characteristic anymore. So I call it what I call reading the white space between the rules. That when a rule book is written, it's there for a reason. It's there. But every time there's a rule, there's white space between it. And looking to that white space, and listen, we have this, I taught nutrition. I've probably taught nutrition 12 or 13 semesters in my life. And we use a Wardwell textbook, and we teach proteins, fats, carbohydrates, water, vitamins, minerals, read a food label. That's Wardwell-based nutrition in a college level and in a general education curriculum. Well, what we're starting to figure out is that there are micronutrients. There are nutrients that have not qualified as vitamin status yet, have not qualified as essential vitamins or essential nutrients. I fully expect spermidine to achieve vitamin status at some point in time. I believe it is a molecule that's critical in this methylation process of autophagy. We know autophagy is critical in cellular health and function. And we know that spermidine is declining in our industrial mechanized food production mechanism. So I fully expect it to become vitamin at some point in time. Now, whether urolithin A is in that same category, there's still autophagy triggers. We've got a lot of science to work out on process, but it only took us solving scurvy to make vitamin C a vitamin. It only took resolving rickets. We didn't have to understand scurvy's underlying cellular mechanism. We just know that when you gave limes or they ate the rats on the boat, they didn't get scurvy. So you had a choice: rat barbecue or a lemonade. And again, that's where all of our vitamins have come from that process. Well, autophagy, we're now, we still don't have a great tool for measuring on a regular basis. It's still a difficult process. We know the values there. We know the benefits there. We know these other things are going to come along. And I believe that we're going to use these external indicators, these objective external numbers, which HRV is one of those, that when you add something to the system and you get a response, that's important. Now, I don't think our systems are there yet. On my podcast, I just had a guy, Dave Kozorski from Heads Up Health on, and we're talking about the fact that I've got all these devices that create data. And frankly, none of them are communicating with the other ones in a manner that gives me a good high-level objective view. And the funny thing is I just sat down 2 nights ago, and this is the beauty of AI right now, is I started vibe coding my own app, and because Dave said something, he says, vibe code it, give it to us and let us specialize it for you. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. So I think we're in this really interesting time when I want a dashboard that shows my HRV status over, Navaz and JP, one of the biggest drivers of my positive HRV is training at altitude. But it wasn't until I spent 3 months living in Lake Tahoe that the rest of the time I'm here in central Ohio at 100 feet above sea level. I go to 6,000 feet above sea level and I train, and even a big dude like me sees the benefit. And then I threw some vagal nerve stimulation, transcarotid electrostim of the vagal nerve, which is what I call it. And I throw that, and boom, I'm starting to play with I'm getting above my All-American numbers. And I start to think of things like maybe wrestling again, but then I lay down and that thought goes away. But it's certainly a good indicator.
Yeah, I love it. I think this has been so insightful for people to understand what it takes to really increase HRV, right? That we really need to focus on that foundation. We really need to focus on those few pieces that you talked about. I love that you brought in community as that fifth leaf, because that is a missing link for a lot of people. And particularly over the last 5 years after COVID hit, people really felt that lack of human connection, that lack of community. Yes, we started doing things with our online communities. That's not the same, right? Like, yes, it's nice to have an online community. I agree. And there's a purpose to it. It doesn't have the same effect, I think, that meeting up in person does, or having people that you can do things physically with, right? Like, who doesn't love getting together for a Christmas dinner, even if you're all fighting over politics or whatever at the dinner table? It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's still a communal space to be with. And there's people that you can go and bike with, and that's your bike group. And this is your people that you get to go and hang out with at the bar. Not that I'm promoting going out and drinking, but that's your community because you feel like you belong and there's a greater purpose that comes from it. And purpose being the jar, being the container. It's so powerful. So yeah, go for it.
And we have to be careful. I believe this is a threat on the horizon. I know we're running a little bit long, but we talk about communities. Synthetic communities don't count. Okay. Now, listen, the three of us, this is an incredibly refreshing hour and a half of my day, of my week, of my month. I mean, and in the absence of technology, you and I, we don't get to do this, and we don't get to share it with our mutual communities as well, which is really cool. It's a really good benefit. But this idea that we can bring in synthetic communities I think we have to be really careful. As I follow AI and the evolution of the work that's being done, whether it's robots or things like that, or, Kara Swisher's special she's got going on CNN right now, I Want to Live Forever, is really interesting view of this. Now, I don't agree with everything she's saying, but community needs to be a rock in the jar. You have to recognize it as important. And, if it starts here, if it starts with a Zoom call with a family member, then make the damn Zoom call with the family member. Know that it's important to invest.
I think our kids are learning how to do that better than we are.
Yeah, I agree.
I think about the fact that, when I went to school, and, this is back in the dark ages, there was the opportunity to see your friends at school, but I went to a private school that had kids that lived an hour away from where I did. They were a half hour in the other direction of school. So I didn't get to see them very frequently.
Yeah.
Whereas my kids now, because they've been to several different schools since grammar school through, now one's in college, they maintain connections with people that they went to school with 2 or 3 schools ago.
Yes.
And they do that through social media and through connections with their iPhones. And
I've watched my daughter do the same thing. I totally agree with you. It's impressive.
I think they know how to maintain a community of friends. I mean, I think of myself, the fact that, my daughter and my son, who are, now older, they have a network of friends that's vast.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Network that I have as an adult even. And they maintain connections with them through social media. So when they want a connection, when they want to be physically with somebody, either, go to the beach for a walk or, go to the gym or go get a matcha or whatever, they always have somebody or usually a group that they can go with because they've got hundreds of people.
I stand
that they're
corrected.
With.
Yeah, great.
You don't have that as adults.
Well, no, but what they do, and JP, I've seen the same thing with my daughter. She was an athlete early on, travel athlete, and I watched her connect with different friends every time, whether we were in Florida for a lacrosse event or whether we're in Toronto for a hockey event or something. And then I've watched her meld these groups together. And then she became a college athlete. Now she's a college coach. And I watched one day she was FaceTiming with a friend who had played lacrosse, and walking through the background was one of her teammates from a hockey team from 5 years ago. And she goes, "Wait a minute, was that so-and-so?" And just the network is just, it's so cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get that, but
they are human.
They're humans. They're not synthetic.
That's exactly right.
It's just a tool. It's just a tool, and they're using it better than we are.
Stand corrected on that one, but I appreciate that a lot. And I think this conversation has done a lot for helping people to understand that HRV is more than just how did you sleep, more than just what are you putting in your body. It's this combination that is unique to the individual, and there are so many factors that play a role here. But there are ways to elevate this. There are ways to boost it. Build that foundation, do the support work, reduce your inflammation, get rid of that stuck in sympathetic, anxious state all the time, and things will adjust and you will be able to elevate that HRV. If not to the 100 and 150s that the Olympic athletes have, still to a point where you are more resilient.
To the top of your range.
Exactly, to the top of your range.
Yeah. Navaz, listen, at the end of the day, as a practitioner, someone comes to see you when they don't feel well. If they do feel well, they don't darken your door. But there's this subjective evaluation of feel. I see HRV as an objective tool that can attach above that you can use along the way. Now, you can't obsess with it. You've got to be very careful, and there's clearly, but I see it as the objective tool that goes along with feel and optimism and these kinds of things. And I see it as a clear indicator of quality of life.
I see it as a clear indicator of your pace of aging. And I think that at the end of the day, my takeaway, or my what I think is the most important point for what I'm interested in, is you've got a layer of different inputs that you're going to experience in life. Some of them you have control over, some of them you don't even know are happening. Ionizing radiation levels, things like that. All of those things are coming into your system, and you have to figure out whether or not they represent a threat to the system's homeostasis or they don't. And the system that does that is your neuroimmune axis. That is your autonomic nervous system and your immune system, your innate immune system. And the best way to know how that's functioning is to monitor your HRV. Because if your HRV is high, then you're not considering things a threat. And if you're not considering them a threat, then your cell danger response isn't being activated. And if your cell danger response isn't being activated, then the root causes of aging are not happening. So it's very simple. You're not going to control what's coming in very well. Those things are coming from the outside world to hit you. How do you respond to it? Are you responding as a threat? If so, your HRV is going to be low. If your HRV is high, you're doing okay. That's why I think it's so fundamental. Things like vagus nerve stimulation sit at that autonomic deregulation theory of aging. When your autonomic nervous system and your immune system are in fight or flight, your cell danger response is pushing you in,
I don't think
in
I
the
could have said
direction
it
of aging.
better. I love those two statements as a way to wrap up this wonderful call. I really gained a lot from this one, I think. And Don, you have something else there, yeah?
Thanks. JP, I think I figured out how to live to 1,000. We have to accelerate the speed of Earth circulating the sun, but maintaining the orbit of Earth.
Just bring a small black hole in
I'm just saying, if we went around the Earth faster, we'd have more years in the time, but we got to keep the Earth spinning at the same rate. So our day and night
speed
stay
up
the same.
the
So
Earth's
that just went through
rotation.
my head.
I love it.
There you go.
Exactly.
We'll just start calling months years. There you go.
This is wonderful. Thank you guys so much for this great call. This was wonderful. If you got to this point in the podcast, share this episode with a couple of people who you think could really utilize this information to upgrade their health. We'll catch you all on the next one.